And this is where the natural next question is, but Jaspreet, what about this economic situation that we're in right now? I'm worried about the economy. I'm worried about a recession. I'm worried about inflation. I'm worried about interest rates. I'm worried about the Federal Reserve Bank. The reality is our economic system goes through cycles. It has happened in the past and it will continue to happen. We have seen a recession pretty much every decade for the last century. So now understanding that cycles happen and that doesn't change anything. If you are passively investing your money, the only thing you change when you go through a down cycle is maybe you invest more aggressively when markets are down, because now you can buy more assets for the same amount of money. If you're actively investing, while we're at the top of a cycle, when you're at peak prices, well, then maybe you just get more picky and look for better investments. The key is to constantly keep buying and building more assets, but also look for the opportunities when you come your way, because then when you go through a down cycle, there's more opportunities that are there because now you can come in and buy good assets at a discounted price. Because the reality is there's a lot of concerns and issues in our economy right now, and a lot of people are predicting more pain ahead in our economy. We're starting to really see the Federal Reserve Bank get worried. We're seeing ex-Federal Reserve Bank officials stating that the banking crisis that we've been facing, coupled with the higher interest rates, are causing more pain in the economy, but the worries and the fears about our economy go beyond just the banking sector. The higher interest rates by the Federal Reserve Bank right now are clearly hurting the economy, but our job market is still way too strong. Now let me clarify this, because a strong job market is generally really good news for the economy. But when you're facing really high inflation, a strong job market can actually make the inflation problem more difficult to solve. Like if you take a look at the most recent inflation report, it said that CPI came in at 4.9% and core inflation was 5.5%. Now, core inflation is what the Federal Reserve Bank likes to look at. That is the inflation number that the Fed has said since the pandemic started is their core inflation number that they like to look at. Core inflation is taking a look at the headline inflation, the broad inflation number, CPI, and then you take out what the Fed calls volatile numbers. So core inflation means you take CPI and you take out food and you take out energy. That's your core CPI, your core inflation. Now, what we've been seeing happen recently is core inflation is now higher than CPI. But what's even more interesting is to look at the drop in inflation, CPI versus core CPI. Because in June of 2022, CPI hit a peak of 9.1%. And back then, core inflation was at 5.9%, which means between June 2022, the peak inflation, and now, CPI went from 9.1 to 4.9. But core inflation, which is what the Federal Reserve Bank says is their primary measure of real inflation, has come from 5.9 to 5.5%. Meaning, yes, inflation has fallen, but inflation still has a lot of ways down, because the Federal Reserve Bank wants to bring inflation down to 2%. And in order to bring inflation down to 2%, they have to jack up interest rates. The reason why they have to jack up interest rates is because inflation is a byproduct of how much money is in our economic system. When there is more dollars in our economic system, more money in our system, people have the ability to spend more, because when you have a bigger bank account or access to more money through the bank, you're going to go out and spend more money. We've seen this happen time and time again. Anytime people have more money, they spend more money. And now when you have a lot of people spending money, that means you have a lot of demand for the products that are out there. So demand's here, supply is here. Now, all this demand then causes the price of things to rise. And so now, when you have all this money out there, that increases demand, causing the price of things to go up, which means now that for the Federal Reserve Bank to cool down inflation, they need to cool down demand. And how do they do that? By raising interest rates. When you raise interest rates, it makes borrowing money more expensive. So now when you want to go out and buy a home, or you want to buy a car, or you want to buy something with your credit card because you can't afford it, now you have to think twice, because the cost of borrowing that money is more expensive. So that means people spend less money, because if you're less likely to go out and shop, if you're less likely to go out and buy a home, if you're less likely to go out and buy a car, that reduces demand. And when demand goes down, that means now you have supply here, demand starts to come down. That means that the price of things don't rise as quickly. Because now when we see inflation fall, that doesn't mean that we're seeing the price of things fall on average. It means that the price of things are not growing as quickly as they were before. The Fed wants to see inflation at 2%. That means that they don't want to see the price of things fall. They want to see the price of things grow by 2%. But what we've been seeing happen is that the prices of things have been rising way faster than 2%. while wages have not been growing as fast. So we've been seeing the price of things grow so quickly while wages have been growing less quickly. And now the Fed doesn't want to see the price of things fall. They want to see the price of things start growing less quickly, which means if your income is not rising as fast as inflation, you're effectively becoming poorer because your salary and your income has less buying power. And this is the difficulty that the Federal Reserve Bank is seeing, is that it is difficult to bring inflation down. And at the same time, we're also seeing the higher interest rates cause pain in the economy. The higher interest rates caused multiple banks to collapse. The higher interest rates have forced other businesses to fail. The higher interest rates have led to a lot of layoffs. But inflation still is extremely high. And so now we're starting to see more and more fear and worry on the Federal Reserve Bank side, because on one hand, they want to bring inflation down. On the other hand, they don't want to tip the United States into a major recession, especially with 2024 being an election year. So this is where now the Federal Reserve Bank is going to have to balance these two things, because if they pause or start cutting interest rates, that could make the inflation problem worse, which hurts the economy. But then if they keep staying aggressive with interest rates, that's going to also hurt the economy. And now the question is, what are they going to prioritize? Are they going to prioritize bringing inflation down, or are they going to prioritize a slowing economy? Because previously, the Federal Reserve Bank has said that inflation is their primary concern and the only thing that they're worried about. They're not worried about the economy. Today, we still have a very strong job market, but inflation is high. But now the Fed is saying, well, we're worried about the economy a little bit, so we might have to kind of ease the gas on inflation. And the reason why the job market is such a big factor here is because, well, the Federal Reserve Bank has made it very clear that one of the byproducts of bringing inflation down is a looser job market, because the Fed can't say outright that they want more layoffs, because that would just cause a lot of controversy. Instead, what they say is that the job market is too tight and we need to see a looser job market. And what that means is we need less people to have jobs.